this week's action-packed and explosive episode of Assassination Classroom, Karasuma goes face to creepy face with the Reaper. This episode has officially convinced me that Karasuma is the baddest mother in this entire series. Yeah, Koro-Sensei is really powerful and he can destroy the moon, but they made the Reaper out to be like the greatest assassin in the world, where Karasuma just completely made him look like a fool in this episode. That's not to say the Reaper didn't give him a tough challenge. He really did, because he was manipulating Professor Bitch and getting her to actually get in the crossfires, which of course would throw Karasuma off just a little bit. He even managed to capture Koro-Sensei in this episode by shooting directly at his tentacles, a feat which completely shocked Koro-Sensei. Koro-Sensei, I honestly thought was going to be going up against the Reaper in this episode. Nope. He's basically locked up in the cell with the students for the entire duration of this week's episode. That being said, the best thing about this episode is getting to see the confrontations between Karasuma and the Reaper. We also get some more backstory from not just Professor Bitch, but from the Reaper himself. So, this week's episode was basically all about Professor Bitch betraying the students and Koro-Sensei and Karasuma as well by working with the Reaper. I'm almost fully convinced that she was going to go along with this plan at first because it seemed like the most logical, it seemed like the most prioritized plan to killing Koro-Sensei. This way she could become filthy, stinking rich. But at the end of the day, her emotions end up getting the best of her, especially because the Reaper ends up betraying her by setting off this bomb, which is supposed to kill her and Karasuma at the same time. She gets covered in rubble, but of course, Karasuma ends up saving the day, not just with his wits, but with his badass ab muscles, which actually end up giving her a bloody nose, which I think is a very nice twist on the typical scene that we see in anime with the male characters always having bloody noses. I really thought that that was a funny scene, and the rest of the episode is this intense confrontation between Karasuma and the Reaper, which eventually ends in a really badass fist fight. There's fists, there's knives, and there's even a finger gun. Yeah, we get to learn a lot more about the Reaper in this episode. We also learn that apparently his face that we've seen the entire time is not real. It's actually a mask. His real face is absolutely terrifying. It basically looks like a red, disgusting skull. He's basically the Red Skull from Captain America with a wig. Honestly, it's the stuff of nightmares. The fact that there's a character like that in this world is pretty freaking amazing, and it's great because, honestly, the Reaper is the closest thing I think we've had in the series to a real, true villain, aside, of course, from Shiro and his one-time subordinate, Itona Horibe. But the Reaper in this episode is so disturbing because what he does is, he ends up shooting Karasuma supposedly in the heart, and that's because he has weapons which are literally built into his body. You see, there's actually a gun barrel inside of his fingers, and he can actually just shoot you with his hand, and it looks like he shoots Karasuma right through the heart. But actually it's this trick that's going on where Koro-Sensei has actually extended one of his tentacles out and they're resting on Karasuma's chest, and they actually end up taking the hit. And they do a pretty good job of convincing you at first that Karasuma is about to bite the dust in this week's episode. They show you the damage inside of his body, all of this blood squirting from his chest, but actually this is just this fruit juice that Koro-Sensei has been drinking constantly to make it seem as if he's actually been hurt. And this gives Karasuma the opening to get in there and start kicking some ass. And that's the end of the Reaper. He's basically defeated in this episode, and I'm not really sure what happens to him, if they just send him packing, if they send him to the local authorities. Are we going to see more from this character? I want to learn a little bit more because they hinted at his backstory in this one, where apparently his father was killed by an assassin and he witnessed this. But aside from being horrified by it, he was actually intrigued. He was excited over the prospect of seeing something so violent and amazing, and that's what made him become one of the greatest assassins in the world. He's also one of the most underhanded characters that I've seen in the series, going so far to not only wanting to kill the students, but basically get Professor Bitch killed in the crossfire. Dude's a frickin' bastard. Now, even though Professor Bitch made some pretty big mistakes in this episode, all of the students, Koro-Sensei and Karasuma, decide to let her come back. Karasuma even is kind of manly in this episode when he decides to give her a rose of his own volition. Honestly, that scene was really nice. I really appreciated it. And they also made it very clear that they're going to have to make some big changes as they go forward as we get closer to the final assassination attempt of the series. And the reason I bring that up as well is apparently this series is going to end with this season right here. There's not going to be a third season or a movie or anything. No, they're going to conclude the story that's being told in the manga in this season of the anime. Now, I don't read the manga version of Assassination Classroom, so I don't know how they're going to be able to pull this off. Some people said that it can be done. It depends really on how fast they get through these stories, but I'm really anxious to see what's going to happen, and the cool thing is, it means we're finally going to get some answers. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Assassination Classroom? This week's episode is all about the badassery of Karasuma. This guy is such an amazingly cool character who, despite the fact that he doesn't really exude much personality, he's one of those anime characters that you end up just really loving. And he kicked all sorts of ass in this episode, but the Reaper also just completely stole the show with his creepy, skull-like appearance and the fact that he has a gun in his freaking hand. Did anybody see that coming? I sure as hell didn't, and it looked really freaking awesome. I can't wait to see if he has any other more weapons or abilities. Maybe we'll get to see him again in the future. I would like to see him return, because as far as I'm concerned, these last two episodes of Assassination Classroom are some of my favorites from the entire series. We also got some backstory for Professor Bitch as well, where we get to see she was taken in by Lovero and his group, where basically after killing someone for the very first time, she became hardened and badass and decided that this is the road that she is going to go down. Yet, she still manages to be a complete bombshell and still manages to be her same old bitchy self. Which is exactly why the students want her to come back, which is something I honestly think is kind of funny. It's also really funny that when they finally started to drag her back as she started to run away, she thought that they were going to basically have their way with her. Pretty freaking strange right there, but still, this was a pretty fantastic episode right here, highlighting the character of Karasuma and showing why he is definitely an assassin you do not want to mess with, because he took down the greatest assassin in the world, aside from, I guess, Koro-Sensei himself, but he's not really human, so that doesn't really count. But still, I can't wait to see more awesome, colorful villains like this, especially ones who have these just unique designs. The fact that this dude has skull face was one of the most surprising elements of this episode, and I cannot wait to see how they're going to wrap up the rest. On the technical side of things, this was a pretty nice looking episode right here. The action and fighting choreography at the end between Karasuma and the Reaper looked really nice. It was really fast and fluid, and surprisingly realistic as well, except for the whole, skull face and, finger gun and everything. But still, it was really exciting, and honestly, maybe my favorite action scene from the entire series thus far. Hell, as far as I'm concerned, they could do a whole spin-off all about Karasuma and his exploits. I would watch it. I think it would be pretty damn awesome. So this was an exciting episode of Assassination Classroom, which is concluding this two-parter as we get ready to move even closer to the big finale of Assassination Classroom. Are the students going to be able to take down Koro-Sensei? Will they have a change of heart with their lovable teacher? We're just going to have to wait and see. So I'm going to give this week's episode right here a 5 out of 5. I loved it. It was just a really fun, action-packed, and really intense episode of the series, which went into some very dark territory for the series. And you gotta remember, this is a series about a freaking teacher who's a yellow octopus with a big smile on his face, so whenever we get these hardened action scenes and blood and all that stuff, it always manages to be really intense because it's such an extreme juxtaposition to everything else that we see in the show. So, fantastic episode of Assassination Classroom. Make sure to check it out if you've been reading the manga or if you've just been watching the anime version of the series. That being said, you heard my thoughts about the episode, but I want to hear from you guys. Did you watch this week's episode of Assassination Classroom? What did you think about the battle between Karasuma and the Reaper? Do you think we're going to see the return of the Reaper? I really hope we do. And what do you want to see from the rest of the second and supposedly final season of Assassination Classroom? Please tell me in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching this review. You guys are awesome. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow us on social media. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby.